right, so I definitely felt like just late last night, looking through different articles in the church's catalog, I found an actual paper, and then I tracked down that paper about, I'll just show you real quick here, this picture that was identified, found conclusive to be Fred Smith. Okay, there's a lot of differences that I could see right away. And I'll just tell you before I start doing my sketch superimposition, I definitely think something I do not see in this picture that is being touted as Frederick Smith, and it was in the news, and it was stating they have all this provenance because it was a descendant of Hiram Smith that found it. So I started researching that a little bit. But right now, just at this moment, I'm just going to do the facial analysis and show you what I found out, and then I'll put a little bit of my research and family search trying to find out who else it could be and what I found out. Ignore the right column. So just from looking at it, I've lined his eyes up as best as I could. I might try to move it a little bit more. It was pretty late at night when I did this, so I can just show you in real time how I would do this. Just bring the opacity down just a little bit. It doesn't really matter. See if I line up that eye. I mean, for sure, their right eye is very, very similar. So I think that's about the best we can get it. I did a pretty good job, actually. The nose is lined up really good. The mouth is right where the mouth would be. The chin is where the chin would be. Okay, we'll just do a morphological comparison, and then we'll start sketching to really nitpick about things that have, most of the face are soft lines, and that's why morphological comparison works the best, and that is why the professionals use that, and they might point out things. But as an artist, I like sketching stuff, and that's just what makes sense to me, and I've always said that term, and that's what I've said since 2017. So basically, you just take the opacity, and to make sure it's lined up, I'm really literally putting my finger at that top eyelid. Let's check out these. Well, the bottom of the nose, as best as we can do it. Their noses are very, very different. The shape of their lips and their mouth are very, very different. There definitely is some similarity of the shadows underneath the lip, but the shape of the chin is actually very different. Definitely Frederick's chin is longer and sort of, and his face is even more square than this man's. Their eyebrows are actually very different. I can see how people thought they were very similar, but this man's eyebrows are very close to his eyelids, whereas Frederick's has very beautiful sculpted eyebrows. You almost think they were plucked, but I don't think he did that. Definitely their right eye is very, very similar, so I get how someone could think, and these high cheekbones, I see that similarity, but I see major, major differences. Look at the shape of that left earlobe. Totally different. I don't know why his right and left earlobe look different, but he has his hair over his ears. Yeah, the hair is very similar, but that is the mountain man, the Western 1850s, 60s hairstyle, was just to grow it out. And it was always off and on. Like Brigham Young always had longer hair, kind of like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just select this real quick and try not to spend too much time, because I know it's not Frederick. The biggest thing is there's a widow's peak right here. Again, we're not doing photoanthropometry. We don't expect things to be perfectly the same, but they probably, most likely the photographer was the same distance because they were sort of following the same rules, unlike today where people are taking photos at so many random different angles, especially with the death mask. But there's a widow's peak right there. And then the shape of his eyebrows are very, very angled. If I use the wrong term, I'm sorry. These are just how I describe it as someone who would sketch eyebrows, but this real peak right there in that eyebrow. You can sketch that out, and the sketch is not going to be perfect. I might zoom in a little bit. Let's zoom in so I can hopefully do a little bit better. Now the eyebrows sort of have hard edges, but most of the face just doesn't have hard edges. You're really looking at shadows, and that's why they often state that facial identification really just is a talent. You can train, and they can train all these computer guys to do all this stuff, but then they'll test them and they mess up. They mess up. As a person that the computer messes up, they still need people that are good at it, and they just need what are called super face identifiers. And there's too many people out there right now that are, even great people who have done sculpting, and, they can be wrong. Okay. Very wide. So I'm pointing out what I see. That's why I started doing this. And this is something I see in my photos, just sort of this shape around the nose. See that in my photo and in artwork. Now the nose, so different. The tip of his nose is higher. And so Joseph Smith's, they both have big nose, but the tip of Joseph Smith's nose is a little bit higher than Hiram's. Tip of his nose is a lot lower, so then the nostrils straight on, and the cameras were usually the same height, usually at the same distance, and this is where it gets subjective, and some people are like, well, I want to say the nostrils really small, so I'm only going to sketch this, but it's like this. Okay, this is a nostril shape, and this is not coming out perfect, and the light is pretty good, pretty even. But yeah, these high cheekbones. But look at the shape of this earlobe. For whatever reason, it's very straight. This one, maybe not as much, but there's a lot of things that can change that very soft tissue. So for women, earrings. You see, just look up, watch those talk shows in the 80s of women with those super heavy earrings. You can see their earlobes elongate tremendously. I just remember seeing that, a lot of women being like, I don't know if as a little kid, being like, I don't know if, see, again, this gets a little bit subjective because with different lighting, this might change a little bit, but it's important that we sketch this out. So generally, they will do a morphological comparison, people that are trained and know a lot about anatomy, know what can change, won't change, and they write whole papers about how makeup will change things. Here's some shadows, but this is... Just looking at him, like, look at his neck. I think he was a real hard worker. I think he was very, in my opinion, I just comparing him and having seen pictures of him and pictures of his brothers, I think he might have been very, very muscular and a lot more athletic. I don't know. I just don't know. But they all worked on the farm. But genetics can play in how muscle lands on your body. So we'll just take away his picture. And look at this. A lot of similarities, a lot of differences. So I would say from just moving this around even slightly, we're seeing a little, it's just so minute, but we're seeing just a little bit more of the left side of his face. But still, the rest of it, you just can't explain away. Just a much sharper angle on Frederick's face. But as I'm looking at this daguerreotype, the nasal tip of this man's nose is a lot lower. It is so much lower. And I see how they think. We tend to we focus on the eyes, and we see a lot of similarity with the eyes. We think, wow, this must be the same person. But is that this is a daguerreotype. And so we are gonna, I'll go ahead and show you it flipped around. So there it is flipped around. And then that asymmetry of Frederick's left eye being a little bit higher than his right, and the eyebrows and the shape, it all just doesn't make sense now. You really see Frederick's nostrils. You do not see this man's nostrils, and it really looks like his eyebrows. Although it seemed, before I flipped it, that the eyebrows matched. This man has a little bit heavier eyebrows, maybe even a little bit thicker, but the angle is not quite as strong as it is. And you don't see, I don't see an indication of a widow's peak. Of course, there is, especially if you go out like this, you can squint your eyes and sort of see there's a lot of oxidation coming up to the top of that daguerreotype, and it's a very damaged daguerreotype. The chin is just way too different. It's way too short. We can just look at that. So look at those nostrils, look at the shape of that nose. And no, hopefully you can see the differences. But now being a flipped daguerreotype, the asymmetry is on the wrong side. The nose is the tip of this man's nose is very, very low, and there's a lot of unique things going on with the bridge of his nose that just aren't there. There's slightly a little bit more side lighting in Frederick's picture. This picture is much better lighting. Eyebrows just much higher. The arch is much more pronounced on both eyebrows with Frederick. The missing widow's peak, the differently shaped left earlobe. Whereas this man has very much more prominent, very rounded earlobes. The upper lip shape, the bottom lip especially, is a lot more rounded and a little bit more narrow on Frederick. His chin is much, much longer. Okay. And then I'm going to talk about some of these other candidates as I went through the family history. This discovery of a rare daguerreotype of Frederick Granger Smith, surviving son, there is a PDF that's about it. There's no evidence that they got a hold of someone that's a forensic anthropologist that specializes in identifying people in photos. So the Swan Auction Galleries, as I'm looking at this last night and thinking, there's no way this is really Frederick. I didn't spend a lot of time until yesterday analyzing. I saw a lot of differences, but I'm like, I'm not going to go there. It sold for $8,750. The daguerreotype of young man believed to be Frederick Granger William Smith, son of Joseph Smith, circa 1850s. And so Frederick Granger Smith, it was 1850s, 1836 to 1862. So if it was 1856, he would have been 20. So he looks quite a bit older there. Was the second of 4 surviving sons. I won't go into that. But then I just skipped right down to here. So it was co-signed by a descendant of Hiram Smith. So they're like unnamed. And that's usually the best way to go, to not let people know who you are if you found something as valuable. Rule of thumb, probably should do that. They come up with an interesting theory of why Frederick's picture ended up in Utah. The co-signer hypothesizes that the photograph may have been given to Hiram's son, John Smith, during his 1860s visit from Utah to Nauvoo. So he just went to visit, and they're like, here's our one and only daguerreotype of our brother that died. And we'll never have another photo of him, but we're going to give this to you. And the Smiths' cousins had been close as children before the 1847 migration and divided. And Joseph Smith III, I'm reading the memoirs of President Joseph Smith III, he always talks so highly of John Smith. They definitely really got along with him. Joseph F. Smith, a little bit difficult, but by the end of both of their lives, even Joseph Smith III and Joseph F. Smith are kind of like, oh, I've had 5 wives. Well, I've had 3. Well, I guess we'll get over this. And polygamy's ended. And they just put everything aside, and they were fine. Up till their death, they really were good with each other. On Smith's return, he would have given the daguerreotype to his sister, Jerusha Smith Pierce. This is the daughter. and she married a man named William Pierce. And then they continue down that line, the Pierce line, who had been born, and then it is from her passed down to her daughter Hannah Pierce. So this person's descended through Jerusha, from Hiram to Jerusha to Hannah. I'm going to read through this. This is free online. You can just read the discovery of rare daguerreotype of Frederick Granger Smith, second surviving son of Joseph and Emma Hell Smith. So they are declaring this as fact. But I just did a quick search and looked at her husband. He was born in 1833. Okay, and then Frederick was born in 1836. So he's 3 years older than Frederick was. And then here's William Pierce, and I just took one look at him, and I'm like, that nose, those eyebrows, those eyes, that forehead, that's the guy in the daguerreotype. It's interesting that long stretch, but just because they're a descendant of Joseph Smith, there's strong provenance. They're a descendant of, well, not Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith. Then they must have a daguerreotype of Joseph Smith's son who died in the 1860s, and they were never going to get another photo of him. It doesn't make sense. Didn't add up to me last night when I really looked through this. And I read their whole paper. I read through this whole thing. I read through everyone who analyzed it. I'm not going to criticize anyone, but you can see they start mentioning it as being positively identified. And these are the people that they mentioned. Major similarities between this guy and this picture. William Pierce. So here's this picture, and there's a little bit better one than that. So I'm going to use this one today. He has a slightly receded hairline, not a whole lot. Interestingly enough, a lot of the sons of Joseph Smith, as they got older, they lost a lot of the hair, but some of them that had that widow's peak, their hair still remained right in that center spot. I'm looking at these two men just right away when I saw Frederick Pierce. Saw a lot of similarities, but when I flipped that daguerreotype around, I went, wow. So now look at the nasal tip. Now, obviously, your nose does get longer as you get older, but still, the tip height is set. Like, President Monson had a very long nose. The tip of his nose was very, very long. Like, you're not really going to see his nostrils. And you could see it when he was younger. His nose grew, yes, but the nasal tip was always really long. So that's one major similarity. And then you can really see how that nose is off-center. It angles a little bit more to our right, his left. You see that in this picture. You see that bridge of the nose, perfect fit. It's flush. That right eyebrow that just comes up a little bit higher because of a facial expression, just how his eyebrows are. They're a little bit angled, but he has very, very deep set eyes. And so those eyebrow hairs and that shadow up to his eyelid, the shape of the eyes, just spot on. Can't see his earlobes super, super well, but the shape of the forehead, really a dead match. Like the height of the forehead. And you can see where it curves, even though he's older and you see a receded hairline, the height of his forehead, it's about right there. That's where the light sort of changes. So we can see this is about where his forehead is. You get to the temporal bone area and everything going on around there. But yeah, you see how we can hardly see his nostrils. I really can hardly see them. Okay, hopefully it doesn't move by me resting my hand right there. Yeah, we're not seeing a whole lot of his lips, but in this other picture, we might be able to see his lips a little bit better. And the ears, they do grow, get a little bit longer. Clearly, he isn't wearing his hair very long at this point. So I'm saying we can resize it a little bit. It's a little bit too wide. Your nose grows, and what I traced there are shadows of his beard. And we can't see his chin, but can see that shape of the forehead, really good. Definitely the angle of that right eyebrow being a lot higher than his left. You can even see the expression lines really just fall into place. And his face is angled a little bit different, so. Again, you can just see the little bit flattening, a little bit higher nasal bridge of his nose. How the nose angles a little bit more to our right, his left. So even though I have not resized that to match up perfectly, you can see his eyebrow hair is a lot better. You can see the thickness of it, the shape of his eyes. His face is angled a little bit differently here, but pretty darn good now. Now just my finger where his mouth is. Now that's really good. So this picture just worked better. You can see that asymmetry of the eyes and the eyebrows. The asymmetry of the nose going a little bit to the left. And again, that beard is just hiding a lot, his chin and his lips, but these are all the pictures I could find of him today. I think he's even a little bit older in this picture. But I believe we just found a younger picture of Hiram Smith's daughter, Hiram Smith's son-in-law, William Pierce. Shape of the forehead is a match, the nose. So all this asymmetry, I'm about positive. And even the expression lines around the eyes, even though he's older. That shape, that thickness of the eyebrow, and you can see the thickness of the eyebrow a little bit better. In this one, you can see the eyebrow hairs, they just match up. Especially this one, it lines up very, very well. Very well. Anyway, have a good day.